October 26, 1962, Syracuse, New York. A late-night maintenance check turns into a waking nightmare when a train engineer vanishes, leaving 4 high-powered locomotives screaming on full throttle with only a bewildered sheet metal worker trapped inside. The railway's newest safety system fails in real time, and suddenly thousands of lives depend on a man who can barely read the controls. This is not just the story of a runaway train that almost destroyed New York. It is the story of what happens when ordinary safety becomes an extraordinary threat. How did a routine shift spiral into a catastrophe that could have erased an entire community? A sheet metal worker named Jim Gerace was finishing up his shift in the Syracuse yard, thinking about nothing more than getting home to his wife and kids. The routine was familiar. Check hoses, tighten bolts, keep out of the way of the engineers. Tonight, that engineer was Robert Cox, moving 4 GP-20 locomotives to the refueling track. The engines rumbled to life, their headlights slicing through the October dark. Everything about it should have been ordinary. Then, in a blink, the lead cab was empty. No warning, no shout. Just the sudden, impossible fact that Cox was gone. Yard workers spotted the locomotives rolling out of the yard, but nobody was at the controls. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then came the shouting. Someone ran toward the tracks, waving arms, trying to catch the attention of whoever might be inside. There was no response. The train picked up speed, wheels screaming, and the realization hit. It was running without an engineer. A few hundred feet away, another worker found Cox sprawled on the ballast, dazed, and struggling to sit up. His face was a mess of confusion and pain. He could not explain what happened. One moment he was in the cab, the next he was on the ground. No one saw him fall. Some said he tripped. Others whispered about a sudden health scare. The truth was lost in the chaos. Dazed, back on the engines, Jim Gerace was trapped in one of the trailing units. He peered through the window expecting to see Cox's silhouette, but the cab ahead was just a dark void. The train kept accelerating. Jim's first instinct was to freeze. He was not an engineer. The controls in front of him looked like a foreign language. Levers, dials, and switches, none of them familiar. He tried the radio, but only static answered. Outside, the yard lights flickered past, then vanished as the locomotive shot onto the main line. Panic spread through the yard. Someone called the dispatcher. Others ran for their cars, hoping to catch up on the access road. The air was thick with the sound of diesel engines at full throttle, echoing off the buildings. A sense of helplessness settled over everyone watching. The safety systems, installed to prevent exactly this kind of disaster, were supposed to take over, but the train was not slowing down. It was speeding up, and the only man aboard had no idea how to make it stop. Automatic train control was supposed to be the last line of defense. When the system detected no engineer in the cab, it did exactly what it was designed to do. It dumped the air brakes, slamming them on with full force. On paper, that should have brought 4 locomotives to a grinding halt. In reality, it barely made a difference. The throttle was jammed wide open at notch 8, feeding every bit of horsepower those GP-20 locomotives could deliver straight to the wheels. The engines roared louder, fighting the brakes instead of yielding to them. The friction brakes, built for slowing heavy trains at moderate speeds, were not designed to battle 4 diesel locomotives running flat out, with no cars behind to add weight or drag. There were no dynamic brakes installed. New York Central had ordered these units without them, figuring the flat territory did not justify the cost. That left only the old-fashioned method: steel shoes clamping onto spinning steel wheels, red hot from the effort. The math was simple and brutal. Each locomotive could push out 2,000 horsepower. The air brakes could only absorb so much heat before fading. With the throttle stuck, the engines kept accelerating, burning through the brake shoes as if they were made of cardboard. The harder the system tried to stop, the more it overheated and lost grip. Jim Gerace, trapped in the trailing unit, watched as the speed climbed. The safety logic, meant to save lives, was powerless against a mechanical linkage jammed in full power. The ATC had no way to cut the fuel, no way to override the throttle. It could only order the brakes to fight a losing battle. For Jim, the controls in his cab were nothing but a puzzle, in a language he could not read. He tried the switches and levers, but the system had locked him out. He was a passenger on a runaway, watching modern safety technology fail in real time. The irony was hard to miss. Every layer of protection had been defeated by a single stuck throttle. On the trackside, the signal system lit up with alarms, but there was nothing anyone could do remotely. The runaway was now a problem racing across New York at a speed no one expected. Powered by the very systems that were meant to keep it safe, the only thing left was to clear the tracks and hope for a miracle. Red lights blinked across the control board in Rochester. Sam Giglia, the senior dispatcher, leaned over the panel, eyes darting between track circuits. Beside him, Bud Weaver grabbed the phone, barking orders to towers up and down the line. Within 60 seconds, every operator from Syracuse to Rochester knew what was rolling their way. A 4-unit consist, unmanned, moving faster than anything scheduled. The main line, usually a tightly choreographed ballet of freight and passenger trains, became a puzzle to solve in real time. Giglia's hand hovered over the route toggles. He ordered the westbound freight at Clyde into the siding, then called for a hold on 2 passenger trains set to depart Rochester. Another crew at Lyons was told to freeze in place. Each decision meant minutes shaved off the runaway's path, minutes that might be the difference between a near miss and a catastrophe. The signal panel glowed with shifting blocks. Weaver relayed track clearance confirmations, his voice clipped and even. No time for debate. The dispatcher's log, later reviewed, showed a blur of notations. Train numbers, track designations, the letters "Runaway" scrawled in the margin. They rerouted every train west of Syracuse, betting that a single misjudgment could cost lives. The phone rang non-stop. Yardmasters wanted updates. Tower operators checked for new instructions. And a crew in Newark reported sighting the runaway, just a blur of headlights and roaring engines. The control room's teamwork was relentless. One man monitored the signal board, another tracked the train's progress by milepost, a third coordinated with police and emergency services in towns along the line. With the main line cleared, Giglia authorized 5 locomotives in Brighton and Newark to attempt to catch up. The plan was simple: get ahead, pace the runaway, and try to board or slow it. On paper, it was a long shot. In practice, even the fastest chasers fell behind almost instantly. Still, every effort counted. The dispatchers kept their focus, adjusting switches and signals as the runaway blew past checkpoints at impossible speeds. As minutes ticked by, the sense of urgency never broke into panic. The control room ran on muscle memory and trust. Each man knew his job, and every move was made with the stakes in mind. The main line, usually a river of steel and schedules, was now a corridor cleared for one train that refused to stop. The hope was that space, empty track, no obstacles, would buy just enough time for someone, somewhere, to find a way to end the crisis before it reached the worst possible place. The 4 locomotives shot west through the night, tearing across the New York Central main line at a speed nobody had ever witnessed from a GP20. The speed tape in the lead cab would later show 92 miles per hour. Well past the 65 these engines were built for. Some trackside witnesses swore it was even higher. Either way, the numbers did not matter to the people living near the tracks. The only thing between the runaway and disaster was 3 miles of empty rail, a sharp curve, and a city that had no idea what was coming. The line into Rochester wasn't built for this kind of speed. Just west of the city, the track bent hard at Chili Junction, a 6-degree curve perched on a cinder embankment 20 feet above the ground. The posted limit for any train, freight, passenger, or light engines, was 45 miles per hour. Anything faster, and the physics stopped forgiving mistakes. At 92 miles per hour, the wheels would barely cling to the rails. The curve itself overlooked rows of houses and the sprawling tanks of a chemical plant. A derailment there would not just mean twisted steel, it would mean homes flattened, families in danger, and the real risk of a chemical explosion lighting up the night sky. Inside the trailing cab, Jim Gerace watched the mileposts fly past. He did not know the track charts by heart, but every railroad man in upstate New York knew about the Rochester curve. It was the spot dispatchers always talked about, where you slowed down no matter how late you were running. Tonight, the train was moving too fast for anyone to even try. Brakes, already burned down to the metal, offered nothing but the smell of scorched iron. The throttle was still jammed at full, and the safety systems had nothing left to give. Dispatchers in Rochester tracked the runaway's progress by the minute. Every time the train crossed a new block, another warning call went out. Police cruisers rolled through the neighborhoods along the embankment, lights flashing, sirens off. Most residents slept through the whole thing, unaware that a disaster was barreling toward them at highway speed. Only a handful of railroaders, huddled in the control room or pacing the yards, understood how little stood between routine and catastrophe. The gap closed fast. 3 miles to the curve, then 2. At this speed, that was less than 2 minutes. The engines howled, gears screaming, brake shoes glowing red in the darkness. There was no plan left. The only thing between the runaway and the curve was a man with no training, alone in a cab, staring down a deadline that did not care about good intentions. The city waited, silent and oblivious, as the train bore down on the point where physics, steel, and luck would all run out. Jim Gerace sat in the trailing cab, hands sweating, mind racing. The engine controls in front of him seemed designed to confuse anyone who was not an engineer. Switches, levers, and dials with no labels he understood. He tried them all, one by one, but nothing responded. The cab was dead. In a multiple unit configuration, only the lead engine's controls actually did anything. Everything else was just along for the ride. He thought about his family, about the houses up ahead, about how little time was left. He could have waited and hoped for a miracle. Instead, he started searching for anything that might break the pattern. Behind the engineer's seat, a thick black cable snaked from one wall to a matching socket on the next locomotive. The thing looked important, heavy, rubber-coated, with a metal collar twisted tight. He did not know what it did. He just knew nothing else had worked. With both hands, he yanked the cable free. The connector popped loose with a jolt. For a second, nothing happened. Then the roar of the engines changed. The vibration under his feet softened. He realized the rear locomotives had lost power. The speed dropped, not enough to feel safe, but enough to know he had done something. The train was still flying, but 3/4 of its muscle was gone. Jim did not know it at the time, but that cable was the 27-pin jumper, the nervous system for the whole engine set. Pulling it killed the trailing units instantly. It was not a trick in any manual. It was just a guess, made by someone who had run out of options and decided to try anyway. Wind hammered Jim Gerace as he stepped out onto the narrow walkway between the locomotives. 80 miles an hour wasn't just a number, it was a force that threatened to rip him from the steel at every step. The handrails shook in his grip, slick with condensation and the grime of 1,000 miles. Below, the ballast and ties blurred into a single gray ribbon. There was no harness, no safety line, just a sheet metal worker clinging to the side of a machine built for speed, not for people. He moved forward, passing the dead engines he had just silenced by pulling the jumper cable. Each gap between units was a leap of faith. One misplaced foot, and he would be gone. The noise was relentless, a howl of diesel and rushing air that drowned out every thought except one: keep moving. His knuckles went white. The only thing steadier than his hands was the pounding of his heart. When he reached the lead locomotive, he hauled himself into the cab. The controls were unfamiliar, but the red fuel cutoff was impossible to miss. He slammed it, then pulled the throttle to idle. The engine choked, then fell silent. For the first time in miles, the train stopped accelerating, but the brakes were finished, burned to uselessness by the Runaway's speed. The train rolled on, coasting toward the curve that had haunted every mile of his journey. With the last of its momentum fading, the locomotives eased onto an uphill grade and slowed. Jim jumped down, grabbed a handful of ballast rocks, and jammed them under the wheels. It was crude, but it worked. The Runaway was finally still. Jim stood on the gravel, lungs burning, hands shaking, the city safe behind him. Railway technology grows ever more complex, yet human error and imperfect systems still collide. Even now, over 1,000 runaway train incidents are reported globally each year, a reminder that safety advances can't outpace vigilance or courage. The line between disaster and survival remains razor thin. Sometimes the only thing standing in its way is an ordinary person willing to act before it's too late.